Good evening, New York, and welcome to 30 Frames a Second, the Nat Wood Show. I am pleased to be here as the host today. I'm Colia Clark, and so I'm here excited beyond words because we have with us one of the most distinguished men of this century. And I said this century because we are closing the 20th century and coming into the third decade of the 21st century. And this man actually closed it for us. And this is Kevin Annett. Kevin Annett comes to us from Canada, where he began his career working as a preacher, believe it or not, for the United Church of Christ. And with that work, Kevin, with his dedication to people, dedication to preaching the Word of God, dedication to living the Word of God, that Kevin's new career began. He discovered after having been at his job for some time, and he'll talk with you about it, that the native people, the indigenous population that we call the Indians, were oftentimes missing. And so he wanted to know why, why they're not here. You got some parishioners, you want to see them. So the journey to uncover his missing clientele, his missing parishioners, took Kevin on the journey that brings him to New York today, that has taken him out into the world, and that has not just made him a distinguished preacher, even though I don't think he considers himself a preacher in the old sense anymore, but it has also made him a distinguished scholar, writer, a prolific writer, one of the best I've seen in probably my lifetime. So Kevin, welcome back to New York.
Love being here with you guys.
I want you to talk with New York today, and we're here, and Nat Woods is hiding over there shooting us with his camera, listening in on whatever we have to say. And that is what I'm very proud of, because he's also a distinguished man. Nat has been honored for his career as a journalist, his career with the Manhattan Neighborhood Network, his career as a photographer. He is probably one of the finest artists that this country will ever know. Nat Wood, everybody, he's shooting us, so you won't see him as you would normally see him with 30 frames a second. This is his show. Kevin, I want to introduce you to our audience. Would you please talk with them about why in the 1990s you began a major project that was spread all the way to the Vatican, way over there in Europe, in Rome, Italy, or wherever that place is. Why?
It started for me as doing my job as a minister. I figured, the part about looking for the one or the 100 that's lost. Well, I was always inclined that way, even as a kid. I've got a story. My latest book is called The Border. It's somewhere. I think I gave Knight a copy.
Yeah, no, we have a copy here. We will show it.
In The Border, I described when I was a kid, I'd be given. My mom had to lock up everything because I'd be giving it away all the time. Folks in our neighborhood who needed it, clothing, toys, books, whatever. Right? So I was always kind of like my eye out for the person getting shafted, the underdog, the people you never remember. So that, when I got to Port Alberni, newly ordained minister, I'd been married, I'd been married 8 years at that point. We had 2 children. But
now Port Alberni is in Canada.
West Coast.
Okay.
I'd been ordained just 2 years in the United Church. And I got called out there, accepted a job at a small church that was traditionally right, and I didn't know it at the time, right where the missionaries had wiped out the last of the Indians who had held out against Christianity the longest. They were called the Ahousa people on the West Coast. And we had quite a history, that tribe and I. Eventually it cost me my job, going to bat for them. But at the time, I showed up and I thought, well, half the people here are native. I don't see any natives in the churches. I don't see them working in the stores. What's going on? So I went out and found out for myself, because none of the whites wanted to talk about it. They all said, well, everyone keeps to themselves. We like it that way, right?
Mm-hmm.
Kind of like the old apartheid argument,
Yes,
right?
yes.
But
We call that segregation down south.
yeah,
right?
well,
Yeah.
they got it in Canada, but they don't call it segregation.
Mm-hmm.
They still got this thing called the Indian Act, which you're not allowed to have under international law. It's race-based legislation, right? And yet there it is still
there.
in legislation in Canada, and that's symbolic of the kind of society it is. Like I talk about in my book, The Border, it's very close society, but it's got this image of, kind of liberal left-wing,
Yes.
but that's not true on the ground at all. And I encountered that as soon as I went on and started visiting the native folks, started bringing them into my church. And a lot of the older white folks didn't like that because they had a guilty conscience. They knew what had gone on in these Indian schools where half the children died, but nobody knew it really in Canada until I started publishing this stuff in the mid to late 80s after I got thrown out of the church for surfacing this stuff. So, I mean, for me, it began in that way. I figured that's what you do if you're a Christian minister. You go and, especially towards the people that you wronged historically, you got to try to listen to them. And don't tell them anything, but just listen. And try to look at your own complicity in the whole thing. So,
can you kind of walk us through what you uncovered in the process of listening and what happened to you in terms of the church community?
Yeah, well,
that is the administrative wing of the church community.
Well, it started, the first native home I went into, I heard stories that, their relatives had been killed in the local residential school. The story I talk about in my documentary on Repentant, a native fisherman, Danny Gus, told me that his best friend was murdered and buried in the hill behind the school. Because I'd asked him why there weren't any natives in the churches. And he said, yeah, the whites know about it. They just don't want us in the church because they know what they did to us. And I heard those kind of stories every native home I went into. I used to take food out to people, get to know them. And it was like two worlds. I'd bring that stuff back into the white world, and they all just said, they're making it up. No, that's true. Because, you see, the lawsuits hadn't begun at that point.
Yes.
So the churches were free to just deny the whole thing, right? Now they put an enormous spin on the whole thing. But at the time, they just denied it all. So that went on for about 2 years. My congregation grew from about 20 to 100 people. It was full to the day I got fired without cause. And the thing that clinched it was I found out from some of the native elders I got to know. I mentioned the Ahousaht people on the West Coast. Well, they had, the missionaries had grabbed the land and then sold it off to their corporate friends. In the case of the United Church, the biggest logging company in the world, Weyerhaeuser Limited in Seattle, was a donor, and Macmillan Bloedel. These two companies were donors to the United Church. So the United Church made sure they got all their land that they'd grabbed from the natives. I found out about that, and I said, wait a minute. In our policy manual, it says if we have native land in our possession, it's supposed to go back to the Aboriginal folks free of charge, and we're not supposed to make money off stolen land, right? So a nice policy, but in practice, there was big money going on.
Yes.
And I was fired without cause. I was told I had to be pastorally retrained. And psychiatric evaluation they also required, right?
Oh my goodness.
Because
Needed
I guess
Freud.
it's crazy to criticize your employer, I guess, in the mind of the church. So I refused to do that. Of course, there was no basis for them to ask for that. I realized I was being scapegoated. And so I got fired. I couldn't get another job within the church. They blocked that from happening. And then, what's even more grotesque is the church went to my wife and said, we're going to make sure this guy's never going to work again. If you want to leave him, we'll pay for your divorce, which they did. And she got custody of the two kids. And this was really weird. They knew she was going to get custody. So they made an arrangement in the family court system. And this is what I mean about Canada. The courts, give you an example, the head of the Supreme Court in Canada sits on what's called the Privy Council, which is the old colonial body of the Old Boys Network. The Privy Council runs everything in Canada and in the government. So you don't have separation of the, different branches of government. It's all one clique. And it's always been like that. And so they made an arrangement with the family court that I wouldn't get my kids. It was all done that easily and quickly. So at that point I was unemployable, lost my kids, the smear campaign had started, so I
Yeah.
couldn't get work anywhere. But the good side was that a lot more Native people trusted me then. Started coming to me. We began that movement that eventually exposed this whole genocide. Right?
Well, down south, we would say the good thing was you had God on your side.
Well, too many people have said that for the wrong causes, so
know.
I'm always leery.
But you walked it through. You lived yours. So you made it, Bob.
Uh,
There were no threats on your life. You didn't get beat up and that kind
oh
of
yeah,
arrested.
I mean that happened eventually when we began to take on. We began to hold protests. We began to confront the churches for. You talked about the research. Well, at the university where I tried to get a doctoral degree, but that got blocked as well. I found all these documents, and that's in my book, Murder by Decree,
Yes.
online, murderbydecree.com. People can see it.
We're going to be sharing that with the books with you, New York, and because he has a goodly number of books. But Murder by Decree is the really foundational piece where he starts, and you can get in and begin to walk through step by step and see Kevin's work and what was happening with the indigenous populations of Canada. We need to be clear about that. Yeah, we'll talk a little bit about Murder by Decree a little further, because what I'm trying to get at is, where was your protection from the law?
Well, it was interesting. There's kind of like this hidden hand at work, because the very year I started going to the university, I tried to retrain and get another livelihood, try to get a doctoral degree. And that same year, they acquired all of the records. These were microfilmed records from the Indian residential schools in British Columbia. And I began to find material in there that was just mind-blowing. It showed a 50% death rate. It talked about sterilization programs in these hospitals where if you were an Aboriginal and you wouldn't become a Christian, you had to report, you got a red tag, and you had to report, you got put under the x-ray machine. So it's like in the death camps of Europe. You were sterilized that way.
But this was happening in Canada.
Canada right up until the 80s, and then they began to do it other ways after that.
Canada, where our men ran to during the Vietnam War to escape having to.
Yep.
Oh,
so
my.
I began to find all this stuff, and I would take it down to I got invited. I said Native people started trusting me more, right? Because they saw the church had thrown me out. So I got invited down to these Aboriginal healing circles in 1996. It started up in Vancouver. And I got in on the ground floor in that. And I remember this one incident. I brought these records from university, from the residential schools. And I showed it to the folks in the circle. And these were like fairly older people who as kids had been tortured. They'd seen kids killed. They had to bury kids out back. A whole gamut of horrors. And one of the women said, "I'll never forgive my mother because she never came and got me." So I whip out this document and I said, I found this. It's called the application for admission form. Every Native parent had to sign it or they'd go to jail. It signed away the legal guardianship rights to the church. So I said, your mother couldn't do anything. She'd go to jail if she had done anything. And this woman broke into tears. And it's like this enormous weight she'd carried her whole life was just lifted. And we took a copy of that and burned it in the fire after. And kind of, to kind of let people see. And later she said, I don't have to hate her anymore. I could see, I said, put your hate where it belongs, at the real target. Yeah. Like our system that tried to wipe you out. And so a little bit of knowledge, just amazingly empowering for people. And on the basis of that, people began to want to do something more than just sit and talk about their pain. That's when we began to hit the churches. We held protests, conferences. We put this in the face of Canada for 15 years nonstop. And we got a lot of coverage until the shutdown in 2008, when the government officially apologized, and they put in a spin, and they had the help of the Native chiefs with that. They put an official spin, and at that point, my name was removed from the national media. Since July 2008, you'll never see the name Kevin Annett ever again. It's like being banned in South Africa. Suddenly, you're just not mentioned anymore. And here we go.
Well, this is New York, I don't know. It's such a story that it's for an African from the United States who's been here through U.S. slavery, coming out of that history. This is not so overwhelming because we went through a similar thing. And then we know that the United States did that with the Dawes Commission, which was designed to make sure that the natives in this country were not allowed to continue in their original native traditions, and that fight still continues. But the children were removed, but we never saw it up close and personal. Yours is a presentation of the up close and personal of really what happened to the children.
And it's still happening. Like, what was amazing, Colia, is we held our first international forum for this stuff in June of 1998. We invited a UN group, ERM. We had Aboriginal observers from all over the continent to come and listen to these testimonies of people. And for the first time, we began to hear stories of children still being trafficked on the reservations. You know, and there's been stuff in the news about missing Aboriginal women. Well, it's actually whole families going missing all over northern British Columbia, still to this day. And, you know, it's big money involved. It's to force, like it's always been, to force Native families off their land to get the water, the uranium. Chinese, American companies just buying up the whole area. And so there's always been big money behind genocide, right?
Yes.
And that's unfortunately why that and child trafficking carries on. But I often say to people, when one door closes in your life, if you keep doing the right thing, there'll be other doors open. And yeah, I lost my kids, but then I had all this new family form around me. And I got invited to Europe after things got shut down in Canada for our movement in 2008, when the government kind of co-opted it and paid off a lot of people and that. People in Ireland heard about it. And they said, yeah, we got the same battle here with the Catholic Church, same crimes. And in fact, the death rate in the Magdalene laundries, in these Catholic orphanages, 50% plus death rate. Same stories of mass graves, everything, medical experimentation, the whole bit. So they said, look, we got to unite across borders, and we formed this tribunal, the ITCCS, the International Tribunal, Crimes of Church and State. And we eventually brought common law court cases against Pope Benedict, Queen Elizabeth, and others. It had really mushroomed after that. There's groups now affiliated with us in 9 countries.
Now, which Pope is Benedict?
Ratzinger. That was the one before. Joe the Rat. Even the Catholic cardinals call him Joe the Rat. He was not a popular man. That's why they did the spin, bringing in the smiley-faced grandfather.
And that's why they
Francis.
set him aside. Joe the Rat got sent to
right.
a trap.
Well, it's kind of like Bush
kind of
becomes Obama. You know, you got to bring in the happy face after the, you know. But they're all, it's the same monster
people,
holding the hand puppets, right? Both sides, right? So yeah. So it's been an amazing ride. But it shows you, you know, when you scratch anywhere, you see the same
thing.
Genocide and crime and cover up everywhere.
Well, you know, one of the good things about the Ireland piece, though, is that the priests began to organize within the church system, I understand. And we get something called here that's not in my name.
Not in our name, yeah.
Yes, not in our name.
I met these guys about 5 years ago now, and they're a group of Catholic priests that want to split off from Rome. You see, there's a policy, and you can...
Wait, let's do that again. A group of Catholic priests that want to split off from Rome?
Well, it's like the Reformation again, you know.
I was ready to say, I'm back here again.
You know,
with Martin Luther.
Yeah, and it always starts out like the Reformation started out pretty conservative, but then it mushrooms. And it led to all sorts of things, including the American Republic eventually. The idea of self-governance, right?
Yes.
But in this case, these Catholic priests, they refuse to follow this policy, which you can see in Murder by Decree. It's called crimen solicitatis. It's a Latin word. And it says every Catholic in the world has to cover up child rape when it happens. It's still a standing policy.
That they have to cover up child rape when it happens.
They're not to tell the police. They're to keep it inside, you know, and if they talk about it, they're excommunicated. And so that's a criminal conspiracy under the law. It's telling every American Catholic you have to commit treason. You got to ignore the child protection laws of your own country because of a Vatican policy, right? And a lot of priests are saying no. Well, not a lot at this point, but a lot of these guys in Ireland are saying no, enough's enough, because over there they have a tradition of militancy. You know, they fought the British for many centuries, and I was there. When I was there last year, we're in Dublin. We're having a meeting of these folks who want to form a common law court to put some of these things on trial, like we did in Europe when we went after Ratzinger, right? And we get a call. Mary Kelly, she's an older woman in her 70s. She says, "Come on, they need us." We go down, and there's homeless families occupying a building. And we go in, and the police are there, the Gardaí they're called in Ireland. And they're about to start busting heads, and Mary Kelly goes and stands in front of them and says, "We've got 100 witnesses here, don't you dare," right? And they stood off these cops, and these homeless people. It's called Take Back the City. They're occupying, Ireland is a basket case economically, right?
Yeah.
It's been gutted. And they're occupying all these empty buildings, taking over and defying the police and the landlords.
So you're not talking about the Republic, the new Republic.
We're talking about Dublin.
Yeah, Dublin. I'm going to be
In the
very
Republic,
clear.
in the South.
So because the two are there, I just want sure that our audience distinguish between the Republic,
Right.
which made recently a deal with the British,
Right.
and the Republic is back up, and that's the fight that people here in the fight about that's going on now in the United Kingdom around the whole Brexit deal.
Oh yeah. Yeah.
That's that fight. So one said they want to remain with the EU, and that's the Republic of Ireland.
Yeah.
And the other one, I'm not too sure what their program is, but that's in the public, so the press. But also in our press here has been recently many stories. So our audience, I'm sure many of them have kept up with the stories about what's happening inside the Catholic Church.
Yeah.
And I want to come back. I'm making my way back on down another road. But we know that there have been sisters and that the nuns, many have said that they were raped and abused when they were inducted into the system.
Yeah.
Where priests were raped and abused. We're talking now about the adults, and we're not talking about natives. We're talking about whoever became a nun and was inducted within the Catholic system. And we know that the Pope had said he was going to calling an end to the abuse. However, not allowing local authority, to be involved at all. So the Catholic Church is maintaining its sovereignty as a nation.
But they're not a nation. That's the point.
I know.
It's a make-believe. There was a piece in the New York Times just last week. The Pope Francis announces he's going to have a new law in the Catholic Church against child rape. But they still don't have to report it to the police.
That's correct. No
so
reports.
It's the same old policy, but he's put a smiley face on it. It's all smoke and mirrors. It's nothing of substance. And that's why there's such a revolt going on inside the church. People are voting with their feet. Like I give you an example of that. When I was in Dublin last year, Mary Kelly took me into Pro Cathedral. It's the biggest cathedral in downtown Dublin. Seats 500 people. We counted 32 people there on Sunday morning. Mostly older folks, right?
Sounds like New York.
I mean, it's falling apart from the inside out, and they're in panic mode. They don't know what to do. And even their spin doctor, Pope Francis, Jorge Bergoglio, he's got a lot of skeletons in his closet that's coming out from the military junta during the Dirty War in Argentina. This man went from being a priest to head of all the Jesuits in 3 years. The same year the military took over, and then he became buddy-buddy. He became like a PR man for the military that were killing over 30,000 of their own people, just like in Chile, throwing people out of helicopters in the ocean. Bergoglio knew about that, and he turned a blind eye. He knew his own priests who were working with the poor were being murdered, and he didn't say a thing. And all of that is coming out now, and so it kind of goes against his whole liberal image. I mean, when he was in San Francisco, he applauded this Franciscan missionary, Junipero Serra, who had killed over 100,000 Indians, worked them to death on this plantation in the 1700s.
Yes.
And he said, we're inspired by his zeal. Like, hello? Well, like, these guys, their ideas never really change. Just the appearance, right?
Yes.
That it's okay to wipe out somebody if they're not a Catholic. I mean, it's just crazy, right?
I mean, it's crazy, but I was coming back down this road because I wanted our audience to understand that we are talking about Canada, where Kevin has established clearly that there was a war on Native people by church and state, the church and the government of Canada. But let us identify these churches. We started out with the United Church of Christ. And
United Church of Canada is called.
Of Canada, I'm sorry.
But there is a United Church of Christ down here.
No, I know that too, but of Canada. I don't want to
Canada,
confuse them.
Yeah.
United Church of Canada. But there's also the Anglican Church, which would be more, one would think of the Canadian base, since it's a British colony.
Church of England, yeah.
So we want to be very clear that the Church of England, the Anglican Church, we have the three of them. So we're not just dumping on Catholic. All we hear is Catholic. Can you explain at all the thinking?
Well, yeah, there was more than the Catholics, but they set up the model originally.
Mhm.
They've been at it the longest. They have diplomatic standing at the United Nations for some reason, and the Anglicans don't. I mean, they've got a lot of inside track and a lot of money and tradition of doing this. They ran about 2/3 of the schools in Canada, these death camps. They call residential schools. But of course, the Church of England, it was really London and Rome. It was like a tag team
Yes.
between Church of England, Church of Rome. The United Church, which is actually the one I used to be in, was set up by the government of Canada in 1925 to like assimilate the savages, was kind of their
Yes.
whole thing. Right? And the immigrants coming
That
in.
late in history.
Right, 1925, right. Yeah, it was tag team. And the thing is, when the lawsuits started, the churches all got together. They planned their legal strategy together. They had support of the government. So this church and state, they operate as a single body in this crime and in the cover-up that's happened since then.
Yeah, that's why I was really concerned about it, because we see a lot about the Queen these days in the news. We see a lot about the black sister who's married into the family and the new baby and all of this stuff.
Oh, yeah.
But we don't hear Anglican or Church of England when we begin to talk about the crimes of church and state. And so I just want to be clear to the audience that's listening, is that the Anglicans are as much a part of this as the Catholics.
Very much. And they're called Episcopalians in America. Like George Washington was an Episcopalian, right?
Yes. Oh,
and
my
like
God,
high church stuff. Kind of Catholic wannabe, right? the Queen's the head of the church, not the Pope, but actually to a Christian, Christ is the head of the church, not Queen or Pope, right? But anyway, that's what I was always taught.
That's right.
But anyway, the thing people need to know is we did an excavation, the only excavation that's ever happened at a residential school in 2011, 2012. Got invited there by Mohawk elders in Brantford, Ontario. It was a Church of England school. It was the oldest one in Canada. It's called the Mohawk School in Brantford, Ontario.
Mohawk natives.
Yes. And they got driven out of New York, of course, by General Clinton,
Sure.
Washington. Their name for Washington is crop burner, because he burned 100 miles of Mohawk corn to drive them up into Canada.
He might have done that, but still to this hour, you see even black youth who will wear their Mohawk hairstyle.
Yeah.
They're still here.
So we got invited there. We brought in forensic specialists. We did a dig right where eyewitnesses had seen children get buried. We found bones. We sent them down to the Smithsonian Institute. A guy called Dr. Don Ortner analyzed them and said, these are the bones of a child about 5 years old. They've been burned and cut up, probably incinerated after being chopped up, was his diagnosis. He offered to come up and work with us. 6 weeks later, he dies of a convenient heart attack, so that didn't happen. Maybe it's a coincidence, who knows. But the net effect was the government moved in quickly through their government chiefs, paid collaborators. They shut down the dig. Not one media outlet in Canada reported the first dig of a residential school grave in Canadian history, yet it was totally censored out of the media. And, the usual smear kicked in about everything we did. So, I mean, that's the point. This stuff has been professionally run from the start, this cover-up. Clearly government or people with big money covering this stuff up, silencing witnesses, the whole bit. But no, that was Church of England school. There, people described horrible things that went on there. Experiments, tortures.
Yes.
Even eyewitnesses, they said they saw sacrificial ceremonies going on, which I've heard elsewhere too. It's fairly well described. People who don't even know each other tell the same kinds of stories about that. So, pretty horrendous stuff.
Yeah, this crimes of church and state is really something that we really are going to have to wrestle with. And you have been our major leader out here on the front line, not only uncovering and presenting the information, but coming up with the strategies and participating with the groups locally and internationally that are trying to face some of this down. I was wondering if there's been any relationship between your work and the nuns and the priests who are now coming out and saying, hey, look, in terms of our induction into the system, this is what we go through. Are any of them now coming on board and to work around what's the genocide that we're talking about?
Well, a few of them have been on board all along, but they don't like to come out publicly. It's like an Aboriginal person. If you come out, you're dead. Like I got a pale skin, so I'm still alive. It's helped me, right? I was known. They don't kill people like me. They just try to discredit and get people
Yeah.
afraid of them, so they don't listen to what they have to say. But now there's the topic is more respectable. It's more legitimate now to talk about these things. So you find more people coming out. Same thing though. I remember right after I got thrown out of the United Church, every clergyman in the United Church got a special letter saying if the name Kevin Annett comes up, you are not to respond to this fellow. You're to refer any of that to the legal office in the national headquarters. And all the clergy in the other churches who said the same thing. There was an enormous scare campaign around me for some reason. Like I'm such a scary guy, right? So there's a lot of fear about that. And churches are cultures of silence. You know, people are not supposed to talk about things, especially clergy, you find, right? So it's hard to get about a third of all, this is an amazing figure. I found out there's about a third of all clergy in North America at some point get some form of work dismissal, unfair labor practice. They're either fired without cause, they get jacked around really bad, and yet they never talk about it, right? And so it's got one of the highest professional burnout rates of any group. I think cops and paramedics and that have an equally high rate of divorce, alcoholism, all that. So with clergy, but nobody talks about it, right? I was part of an attempt to actually unionize ministers. Well, right after I got fired, and we got as far as the Auto Workers Union was actually going around certifying clergy. And so this wouldn't just be ministers, but the janitors, the church secretaries, everybody in United. But Canada, you know, people got cold feet and whatever, but, you know, it didn't get very far. But when you gotta, like these clergy in Ireland are saying, not in our name, and the nuns being raped, you hear those stories all the time. Happened to my friend Yvonne Mays, who used to be a nun in Africa, and she got raped by priests, and when she tried to make an issue of it, they locked her up in a psych ward. You know, they said this woman is mentally unstable, the whole bit, right? She got put through the ringer. So there's a lot of tales out there, you know, in the church, and we got to open that up. So
You know, it's important, but the church.
Yeah.
We're talking about three that we have mentioned here today.
Yeah.
But you hear similar stories coming from Baptist, Methodist, and other churches within the United States of America. I don't know about Canada. I have a young student in my class who came in whose mother knew that she was being taken advantage of by a Baptist preacher.
Yep.
But yet allowed it to go on, you know, from the time she was 14 years of age.
Well,
you know, you hear it, you get angry, you want to fight, and it's like,
well, frankly,
what
you know,
is the fight, you know?
Colia, you hear it in other denominations. I've had people, Jews, Muslims. I even got a call from Hare Krishna fellow who said that children are being trafficked in the Hare Krishna movement. So it's almost like any religion, they state protected, they don't have to pay taxes. There's a whole aura that we can't be touched. And you're tempted to play God and have that power over people. So I think it's a systemic problem. Of course not, but
God doesn't kill children up just because He can kill them up.
No, but I mean,
and there's even evidence that some of these people are killing them for food.
Oh yeah, well,
you know, so you know the crimes are just unbelievable.
And I got a call I had on my radio show, which I do on Sundays. A woman who used to be a fairly high up member of the Mormon Church, Salt Lake City. She described to me as a young girl being taken into ceremonies. She was ceremonially raped. She saw people getting killed. Catholic bishops showing up and leaving with Mormon kids and never being seen again. And now there's got to be some strange relationship between the Mormon and the Catholics. The Mormons just opened a temple in Rome, and the Catholic Church considered them a pagan cult. And yet here they are with a new temple and a private audience with Pope Francis, the head of the Mormon Church. So they've got some kind of relationship there. So, I mean, at that level, it's the same kind of corruption going on in these churches. You know?
It's unbelievable.
Yeah.
I mean, I hear it out of Africa. I knew a young woman that I was in school with, in college with, who talked about being raped. And this is years upon years before I met you. Being raped in Africa and how popular by the nuns. And it was tied to her culture because she, you know, nothing you couldn't tell your father.
Yeah.
Because they sent you to this school, you know, to get an education. They had great expectation for you. And here you are being taken advantage of, and you can't even report it to your family because of cultural ties of various sorts.
Yeah.
I mean, it works in a number of ways, but we need to begin to continue this discussion, and we need to continue this discussion in the community. Because if this is going to end, then the parishioners in the church need to revolt, and the community needs to revolt. I grew up in a time down south when it was said, if the devil was in the church and they won't do right, throw him out, right straight on out. And you let the church go on. So we need to turn it around a little bit. The devil's in the church and they won't do right, you throw him out, right straight on out, and let the children live on.
Mm-hmm.
Because, we have to begin to protect the children of the planet. That's our responsibility, it seems to me, as human beings. And it seems to me that has been the thrust of your work.
Well, yeah, and it's funny, it keeps, like anything you stay at over a lifetime, it keeps growing all the time, right?
Mm-hmm.
And people come and one of the things that's been a disappointment is the people who you'd think politically would back this stuff haven't been there. And my background for 40 years has been in the left in Canada. And, it's ironically, when this first began to come out, and here's a classic case, there was the editor of the Pacific Tribune, it's the Communist Party newspaper on the West Coast, right? Mm-hmm. And when I first began to bring this stuff out, I went to them because I figured, they're natural allies for this stuff, I assume.
Yes.
And I remember the editor looked at me and he said, the United Church can't have killed children. My own wife is a United Church member. And I thought, I didn't see the logic there. but unfortunately, if you stay in one place, I think, you can become part of the status quo mentally and you don't even realize it. Mm-hmm. So unfortunately, a lot of people who I would have thought would be natural allies are fairly conservative when it comes to things like genocide in their own backyard.
Yeah.
I remember I had a friend, Neil Cohen, he was a white South African. He said, growing up in apartheid South Africa, it didn't matter what your politics were. You were on one side of the barricade and you weren't suffering. The whites had it privileged, and you could call yourself a left wing, but were you really part of the solution, really? Maybe in your own mind. I find very similar with apartheid in Canada, but Aboriginal stuff, like the left, and I don't want to run them down because they're just a victim of their own culture, environment, I know, and I was there until...
Run them down.
Yeah, but
it's time.
But they're not there, like there hasn't been anyone from the left who supported this campaign. And I think it's kind of the attitude of, if this genocide had been going on, we would have known about it, right? Like, why wouldn't we know about it? There was kind of that mystified thing. But even when we held protests in that, people didn't show up. They said, we can't picket the United Church. We hold our meetings there, or they've supported our unemployed coalitions, so we can't attack them. And I said, but these are children's lives. This is genocide. So I think, white privilege really affects, it doesn't matter what your politics is. You've got to really look, you've got to have your life turned inside out like mine was, till the scales don't fall from your eye when you're part of that privilege, And so that's something I hope will change, right?
But I don't know that it hasn't become a little bit of black privilege as well these days, and we certainly don't have any privilege. But the ability to turn away when you see what's happening, or to close your ears and pretend you don't hear the screams and cries.
Right.
I think it's now cutting across all groups.
Yeah.
In 1968, when they assassinated Dr. King, the United States of America passed a Native American Civil Rights Act. In any other culture, this would just be unthinkable. A Native American Civil Rights Act? The natives fought it, of course, but it was passed. So natives would have been pulled into the control of this government. So the indigenous nations and peoples. So they fought back. So we have to begin to, I think, make it clear, and you have been on the front line out here, but we have to make sure that your work is clear to everybody that these indigenous populations are here. And that no, we don't have a right to take their land. We don't have these rights because we set up a government. And George Washington, when speaking to the Continental Congress in 1787 about the coming new republic, which would be in vogue by 1789, was real clear about what the goal of the new republic would be. That's the one we call the United States of America. The goal of this new republic would be to destroy the wolf along with the savage. The savage were the indigenous populations, moving westward to establish a beachhead and from there southward. So we will see the Monroe Doctrine by 1821-22. They're southward to create the European Empire.
Right.
So this is from the beginning. I mean, these plans were clear, and step by step, and everybody, Adams agreed with him. Thomas Jefferson agreed with him. Everybody. There was not one single soul among the leadership that did not disagree. Adams said, reluctantly, yeah, I agree with you, but I think we'll have to pay for this one day. You know, there'll be some fallback from it. Thomas Jefferson also said, well, you know, it's got to be done, but, you know, didn't want to push his feet in, but said, you know, I agree. So when we began to talk about what's happening, we have got to begin to look at the Kevin Annetts and your genius and your ability to take an issue, research it, and bring it to us in a way that's clear. We can see what's there. And we're going to have to do it because it's not just happening in Canada.
No.
It's happening in the U.S., it's happening in Central and South America, where the present Pope was once in Argentina, where kids are missing.
Well, it's a global industry, this child trafficking and this system, and it's like everybody's on the reservation now. And you know that recent example in Rockland County where all the kids had to be vaccinated.
Yes.
And the parents would go to jail if they weren't for 6 months. That's like right out of the Indian Act. If you didn't put your kids in a residential school, you go to jail for 6 months.
That's
right. And people are acting shocked now. Well, it's been going on for a long time, people. It just hasn't happened to you. And now we're all getting a taste of what it's like to be on the reservation. You know, and you know, if anything, that means we've got to unite now. That's the thing. We got to have that basis of unity, regardless of your politics or anything.
Yes.
Defend the earth, defend our liberties, defend our children. I mean, what's more basic, right?
Yeah. Blessed the children.
Yeah.
Come unto me. I mean, we won't play the Christian game. But we're going to have to begin to really move religion. And well, Africa, they're saying now, remove it off the stage. It's all over. People are saying they don't want no Christians. They don't want no Jewish religions, no Hebrew religions. They don't want the Moors. They don't want the Muslims. They want to just move all of them off the stage. This whole movement going on to move all religions off the stage.
Yeah.
Because they're saying that religion is the problem. Now, I don't know. Down south they say, oh, I don't know, I ain't the Lord, but I tell you, we better do something more than pray. Because I think people will come to an hour, and as we begin to wake up, well, people are saying, you're not going to kill us, and you're not going to kill our children. That this is just an unacceptable way of living in the world. There's another way of living in the world, but that means that we're going to have an uphill battle. It's an uphill battle all the way.
It always is.
Yeah, it is.
Yeah.
But it's doable.
Yeah.
And so it's that time, New York, when we have to begin to talk about you and I as individuals. I was on a bus yesterday, and as we passed the Church of St. John's Divine, this gorgeous building there, this woman was just going off because it was her church, and look at, just ecstatic about the building, about the structure. And I was saying to myself inside, but what about what's in that building? What's coming out of it in terms of thought? Now, I don't know that that they've got issues. I don't want to put them on St. John's or any other church. But we need to begin to rethink religion. And for Africans who came here, who were inducted into this Christianity, because this is not ours. It's a hard game. For the natives who were forced into, it's not ours. Red Jacket being forced, and this is a native chief in the 1830s, right after the wars on them by Andrew Jackson, who would become president of the United States. He was so vicious when he came through Jackson, Mississippi, they renamed it the beautiful LaFleur's Bluff, the Gulf of Flowers, Jackson. But this man was so violent that what they did was they began to, right after his administration was going to the White House, began to force natives to meet with Christian groups. So they were bringing all of these Christian groups from all of the denominations that were present at the time out to Red Jacket's territory. I believe he's Redbud Sioux. But bringing them out to Sioux Nation. And they were demanding that the chiefs be present. They demanded their presence. So he came, and to show his disdain, his disgust at this outrageous request, he said, you know, you've already got my land.
Mm-hmm.
It's not the gold and silver, and shouldn't that be enough booty for your bounty?
Yeah.
You got that. There's nothing else here for you. Get food. I mean, you got that. You got the land. You can grow food.
You remember Frederick Douglass's description in his biography about when his master became a Methodist, he had a conversion?
Yeah.
And he said, oh, good, he's seen the Lord, now he's going to free us. And he
Yes.
said, no, it made him even worse. He beat me even worse because he had the Lord on his side now, right?
Well, Red Jacket was real clear. You could take your religion and go because the Great Spirit already owns my soul.
Right.
You know, so.
Was it, I think that either Frederick Douglass or Abraham Lincoln said, he asked what his religion was, and he said, when I do good, I feel good. When I do bad, I feel bad. That's the extent of my religion.
That must have been Frederick before he
I
got
think so, 'cause-
before he got ordained. His church up at Rochester now, where he got ordained,
Oh, yeah.
I think it's becoming a dollar store.
Uh,
Nobody fought for it, so you know.
yeah.
These great men, these great minds. Their words remain with us, but they seem to have left the stage, and we've got Kevin Annett. We got a new
Well,
group.
I'm looking, I'm 63 now, and I'm looking for somebody to pass the torch on to. So I'm really looking for people in the young generation. A lot of what I do, I go around and give lectures, workshops, to show people how we can set up these common law courts, how we can bring the community together to protect our children, right? When the courts aren't going to do it, we've got to do it.
So
right.
we will be showing your information so New York can call on you.
Yeah.
And wherever the show goes out to, and
Yeah.
it goes out to millions, nations, worldwide. So
End
they
of
can
June.
call on you,
Yeah.
young people especially.
Yep. End of June, I'm coming back in New York.
All right, the end of June. All right.
And early July, we got a thing going on at the United Nations, which we can talk about sometime.
But we need to talk about that today.
Right? Okay.
Because maybe some of the people can get that, especially you young folk out there, because it is time we close the 20th century. Dr. King wanted it closed. He said in his work, looking at the Poor People's Campaign, civil rights is behind us. It is time that we move to human rights. It's
Right.
time we accept we're in the age of cybernetics, a whole new era. Of course, they wiped him out immediately
Yeah.
because they recognized where he was going. He was,
Yeah.
you know, he said, no, we're in the world of people developing nuclear weapons and stuff. We cannot afford what we've been doing in the civil rights era and black folk in this country, holding on to this group of leadership and ideas from the civil rights movement. It was fine for the civil rights era. It worked well. We got a civil rights bill for what it's worth. Affirmative action was dead by 1990, but that's all right. We still got that stuff. He couldn't see the death of affirmative action from where he was standing in 68, I'm sure. But to be able to pick up and move on, meaning it's time for a new leadership.
Mm-hmm.
And that leadership has got to step up to the plate, and we have got to accept them.
Yeah.
And we elders, and I'm not referring to you because I got you about 17 years. So we're referring to you're still youth, and you're still where leadership needs to be. But we've got to bring out another group to be able to replace us, because this work that's being done, the scholarship, and you have benefited finest of any scholarship anybody's I've seen, but from anyone in terms of your writing, your thinking. But that scholarship needs to be taken advantage of to develop new programs, new policies, and that's young people's job. That's the job of young people. So young New York and young wherever this goes out to, Kevin Annett is making himself available.
Yes.
He's making himself available. And I'm sure that's true for Colia Clark, and I'm sure that's true for Nat Woods. We're making ourselves available to you. Mm-hmm. You've already been out here on the battlefield for a lifetime. But now is your time, your journey. And all of this work is being done, and this man's family was destroyed and pulled apart. A struggle for him always redefining, and I'm sure trying to pull his children back in. But it's not easy to be hurt in that way. So it's time for you to help him to bear this cross uphill, if we want to call it a cross. Whatever we want to call it, it is a battle that's got to be waged against an enemy that has no respect for human life,
Nope.
no respect for any animal life, no respect for the beautiful trees in this garden in which we sit, no respect for bugs, bees, and birds, no respect. And once we understand that we are dealing with that kind of an animal, I don't care whether we put a building around it or camp around it and call it a church, or whether we call it a school, or whether we call it a community. It's an evil institution.
Yep.
And we have the responsibility as adults to do what this man has been doing, to the point where we got a whole clergy out of Ireland saying not in our name, and ready to post those documents that Martin Luther published a long time ago.
Yep.
That gave the Catholics hell.
Yep.
It's that time, it's that hour.
It is time, and it's, the Mohawks who I work with have a word in their language, and it means, the closest English word is reclaim. They set up roadblocks to reclaim the lands, keep the bulldozers out of the little land they have left. But they said it starts here. You got to reclaim what's in here first. You got to reclaim your mind and your heart. Pull your soul out of the system. You can't do anything when you do that unless you do that first. So this, you could call that a spiritual battle, very much, without putting the name on it, religion or anything. But it is. It's coming from here.
Yeah.
That's where it is, right? And I often say to people I'm an exile from my own country, my own culture, because in the book I wrote, The Border, I'm half American. My father's from Fort Lee, New Jersey. And I say it's my American side coming out all the time, this kind of ass-kicking side, right? Because in Canada, people go like that if you challenge authority at all, right? There's a fear of authority that you don't get most places I've seen in America. So it gives you a real advantage working down here. So.
But what a contradiction, because if we looked at it from the African perspective,
Yeah.
this is the place we ran to.
Yeah.
I mean, that is the history
Yeah.
for freedom. But when they tell that story, they don't tell folk, we ran there for freedom, but we were running to a slave country.
Yeah.
Canada had slaves. So, so this
Indian slaves too.
this mythology, everybody had Indian slaves.
Yeah.
This mythology that we get that needs to be kind of overcome so that
Right.
we can begin to understand
Yeah.
that there's a Canada. Our brothers ran from here during the 60s in the Vietnam War.
Yeah.
This is where they ran to.
Mm-hmm.
This is where they had freedom. This is where they had Canadian radio and Canadian television that was a far cry better than anything and freer than anything before they wiped them out than we had here. So these contradictions have to be dealt with and sorted out so that we can see the real distinction between Canada and that 1,000 years of peace between it and America. All of the stories that we get when we talk about the history of Canada and its relationship to the U.S. We got to sort it out. Of course, the Irish who came there by the hundreds of thousands here, looking for a new way of life, could have sorted it out for us if we had just listened to them when they came in the door.
Yeah.
But we got to sort it out somehow. But you've got a number of books. Do you want to talk about the books a bit?
Well, there's two of the
You mentioned the borders.
Yeah, The Border is a recent one. It's kind of more, you got to see humor in this or you go nuts, right? So I've been trying to write it from a more ironic point of view. But a book that really summarizes a lot of this that I wrote last year was At the Mouth of a Cannon. And it really shows what I call the triangle of the octopus, the church, state, and big money, that from the very beginning were behind the genocide. The forces that I mentioned earlier, Weyerhaeuser, the land grab and everything through the church. That's really what's still at work, that triangle. And, so I talk about that in there. And people can see all that on Amazon. Just put on my name, Kevin Annett. You can see all my books.
So your books are all on Amazon.
Another thing I do is I've written two books. One's a whistleblower manual, which is kind of looking at a lot of the lessons when you're up against the system, how you can navigate, maneuver it, and a common law training manual, how people can set up their own common law courts, their own investigations and movements to take power back into the community.
So two critical tools.
Very much. So that's two I'd recommend as well.
That is wonderful.
And Murder by Decree, which has got
Murder by Decree,
all
the
the
history,
evidence.
the history of what happens here.
Yep.
I just think it's remarkable that we've got this. And are there any new Vatican updates?
Well, what's going on in the Vatican, this present Pope is on his way out as well. Because all of this stuff, it's interesting. Recently, I mentioned, his whole sordid background in Argentina. He's had a long relationship with the Queen of the Netherlands. Her name's Maxime Zoriega, and she's Argentine as well. Her father was in the military junta. There was a Dutch journalist called Ella Stur that I work with, and Ella found out that this Maxime Zoriega has been paying the present Pope 12,000 euros a month for the last 9 years. Now, why she would be paying him is a question, because it's interesting when a lot of these stories were first coming out about the children going missing in the Netherlands, and this group called the Ninth Circle, which apparently is a sacrificial cult operating in the Catholic Church, child sacrificial cult. Eyewitnesses who took part in it, who were raised in these cults, have all come forward to describe this. You can see this on our site, murderbydecree.com, many of the testimonies.
Can you kind of describe what happens when we talk about these sacrificial cults? What's happening here?
One of these people who was at that described the Dutch royal family involved in this stuff, and even the present Pope and the predecessor at these ceremonies. So these guys are involved in more sordid things than has ever come out yet. And like with the stories that first surfaced in Canada, it begins with these anecdotes from people who saw it. And then insiders come forward, and then you get documentation. But you need somebody to go in there and initially expose these things. And at the time, people think they're crazy because this stuff can't possibly have happened. But then you realize...
Are these child sacrifices?
Yes. And it's not inconceivable when you look at all of the evidence. The people all over the world are describing the same kind of ceremony going on. And this Ninth Circle, it takes its name from the Nine Circles of Hell in the poem by Dante, where the Inferno.
Yeah.
And the Ninth Circle is where Satan resides, along with people who betrayed a sacred trust, according to Dante. So they do that. They invert their vow to God, and they kill a child, and then sometimes cannibalize it in the ceremonies, according to these witnesses who were there. Now, this is being confirmed by journalists, police officers. People know about it. It's like with the Indian residential school crimes for a long time. If you mentioned a dead child 15 years ago, they'd think you're crazy. Now everyone's talking about it. It's an accepted topic to say, yes, children died in these Indian schools. I think the same thing is going to come out about these
sacrificial
things. And that's why, I mentioned Pope Francis meeting with the head of the Mormon Church.
Sure, yes.
The Mormons are involved in these same activities, and I think the reason they allowed that Mormon temple to be open is that kind of thing is going to be going on there. It gives them another cover under which to operate. And all of this stuff is coming out now, and frankly, the Vatican doesn't know what to do, is my reading of it. And from people we know in Rome, journalists, people inside the Curia, which is the College of Cardinals, they're all saying the same thing. They're just trying to create an appearance of stability while the whole thing is falling apart. And I think you're going to see a big shift in the years to come, maybe even the months to come.
Yeah, that big shift, and then how is that going to affect the economies and the lives of poor people around the world? It's very interesting. I'm watching the Congo, though.
Yeah.
And people all screaming the Congo and Ebola and da. Well, the Congo has had a history of being negative towards the Catholic Church, even though the Catholic Church has a huge control there.
Oh, yeah.
Even Trump was very upset when the Catholics didn't get their man for president this time. So as we began to look around the world, I think we could begin to see examples of what it's like when groups fight back. And we see everybody jumps on the Congo now and this and that. But people are saying we want